Welcome agents. On Wednesday, Massive revealed many changes coming with Title Update 5, which we'll be able to test on the PTS this coming Monday the 1st of July. Now in that video, I summarised everything, but today I wanted to give you my initial thoughts on these changes and talk about some further things that have been confirmed by the devs on Twitter. Now if you enjoy this video, please hit the like button below, subscribe for dedicated Division content, and let's get into this. Alright, so I'm not going to touch upon everything that's coming, but instead give my initial thoughts on the most important things for me. Now first up, let's talk about confirmation of exotics dropping from heroic bosses, and exotics always dropping at their max rolls for their gear score. Now this appears to have picked up some traction on Twitter, with Frederick Thylander, the weapons guy at Massive, responding to a tweet from Likebutter about this very change. Now as you can see, Likebutter tweeted at Frederick saying, "The item that needs RNG to be toned down was the high-end brand sets, not the exotics. We'll see how it plays out, but I have the feeling that this static stat change to exotic weapons goes against the point of allowing bosses to drop them now. Hashtag the Division 2. Now, as you can see from this thread, Frederick talks about ideas that they have that would accomplish the issue with these drops we miss from the Division. Who remembers the first time they dropped the House Exotic or got a weapon with brutal and deadly talents on? Who remembers the Midas, when we had the first Midas come out when the Division first launched, and it was a high-end Midas and it was unbelievably strong? Now this is something the game is missing for sure. There isn't those, holy crap drops. That's definitely something missing. Now my initial reaction on exotics dropping from heroic bosses was positive. If you go back to my video, I said it was a good thing. Now the devs confirmed that these would only drop once you have either obtained the weapon from a blueprint, an example being the Nemesis, or from specific missions like the Merciless. This news alone was good in my opinion because it meant people who had done the grind now had an opportunity to get a better roll of their exotic from another activity. But, and this is a huge but, on reflection, because the devs confirmed exotics will drop at max roll now, they are just going to dilute the loophole even further for these people with no benefit. Now, if I do a heroic mission, it might drop the exotic chatterbox, for example, but the one I already have is at max roll, and the one that drops will also be at max roll too, so it's just going to be an instant dismantle, and it could have possibly replaced a possible high-end piece of gear that I'd actually need. This to me is the biggest concern with this change. So if the devs want to keep it that exotics drop at a max roll, then I am good with that, but I don't then think they should drop from heroic bosses. Frederick confirms himself that exotics are collectible items, and they're not the holy crap drops. So ultimately this system is just going to dilute the pool even further. Now my recommendation is you either have them drop at max roll or be crafted at max roll but only earn from doing specific activities, or they don't drop at max roll but instead have a very small top end attribute range, meaning you can still farm them for their max roll. Now maybe you could even have a situation where they drop at maximum roll with a very low chance that they exceed the maximum attribute rolls, and when this item would drop, for example, it could glow or something, so it's dropped with a stat roll above maximum. To me this would give you that holy crap feeling, that say for example the Merciless drops on the floor and it's orange or red, whatever the colour is, and then it glows yellow as well, for example. That when you pick that up, it's going to have an attribute, or all of its attributes are going to be above the maximum. That's got that holy crap feeling that we're missing from the Division 1. And again, this would give you something to grind for as well. Now, saying that exotics are collectibles and then allowing them to drop from heroic bosses once you already have a max roll one anyway because you have to, proves there's an identity issue with exotics. This can be further evidence with the Eagle Bearer being by far the best assault rifle and probably weapon in the game, but this is just a collectible, apparently. Now, just some news on the Eagle Bearer, by the way. Frederick has confirmed this will only drop in the raid and not from heroic bosses. So, all in all, I don't think this current change is a good one at all. And I think people will quickly get fed up with exotics dropping from heroic bosses when the stats are all going to be the same. I mean, ultimately, what's the point? Okay, so let's just move on to something more positive. Now, Crafton is getting a very good update. TU5 would allow you to finally upgrade your Crafton bench to gear score 500 and will require one gear score 490 gun, 490 gear piece and materials to do it. Now, on top of this, the recalibration station will now allow you to recalibrate crafted items. This is a huge step in the right direction for me. Crafton at the end game in the live game currently is almost non-existent, except for when you're crafting weapon mods, which is only a one-time use thing. Being able to spend materials and credits on crafting gear that you might need, instead of solely relying on RNG, is a huge win. And it's made even better with the news of being able to recalibrate that crafted gear as well. So that's a big win for me. Now, I'm excited for this change, but it wouldn't be fair if I didn't mention the elephant in the room here. Why are there currently no further changes being addressed for the recalibration station? Now, I really thought that the devs would, at least for now, allow us to re-roll 2 times with the recalibration station. It wouldn't be a permanent fix, of course, it's kind of like a band-aid, but something to help reduce the RNG in the game from some of that appears to be very straightforward to do. Now, I'm not going to pretend to know how much work goes into a change like that, as I'm sure it's more than just, the flip of a switch, but I really thought something like this would make it into TU5 testing starting on Monday. I think people will quickly get frustrated with the RNG required during the crafting process now, because they can only swap one attribute and not anymore. The crafting station will reduce the RNG a tiny bit. That's good, and I don't want to overshadow that. But this could have been a real home run if they'd announced changes to the recalibration station like this one. Next up is confirmation that blueprints will now be shared across all sources. And again, I think this is really good news. I know a lot of people who love farming control points and hate having to do projects for their blueprints, and likewise the opposite. Now, being able to grind level 3 or level 4 control points knowing you can get every blueprint is a very good change, and a lot of people will be very, very happy with this. It's a very subtle sort of quality of life change, but I think it's a very important one to keep players engaged and keep players playing the activities they want to do, rather than being forced to do something they don't want to do. It was also confirmed that Anaya, the vendor, the blueprint vendor, would be selling these blueprints at the vendor now as well. So if you don't want to do any of these activities and would rather farm PvE missions for credits to purchase the blueprints, well, you can. Again, it's a very good step in the right direction for me. Moving on, and the meat of the news was the skills overhaul. Now, I don't want to spend too long on this because this will require some serious testing before coming to any sort of conclusion, but my initial thoughts are mostly positive. Now, I say mostly because Massive, well, they're like a seesaw. They either nerf our gear into the ground, or they buff it to the point of being brokenly overpowered. It's very rare that buffs and nerfs are introduced where it creates a good balance. Just look at the changes made to Unbreakable and the armor in the current live game as an example. When we first played PvP on launch day, it was very clear that the time to kill was very low, with a PvP modifier of 70%. Now, everyone moaned that due to the low time to kill, the gear or weapons you were using had little to no effect on the outcome of a gunfight, and that, it makes sense. Now, Massive stepped in and reduced the modifier to 40%, introduced the gun and medkit, and buffed Unbreakable, making you literally unbreakable in the live game. Why they didn't reduce the modifier to say 60% or 50% and do it incrementally is something I've mentioned before, and I still don't understand now. Now, anyway, I'm kind of going off topic here, but that's my one example of, of where Massive seem to go from one end of the spectrum to another and never quite find the middle ground. And again, that's just one example. There's plenty of them. So skills, anyway. The changes coming, they do look very promising. I like how the devs looked at the high ceiling of the DPS meta and used that as a benchmark to start buffing skills up to this level. I'm glad they took this approach as opposed to nerfing weapons down to the level of skills. I can't imagine the backlash from that. Now, this ultimately means that the raw power of skills has been drastically increased, so skill builds should now be viable in TU5, at least in respect of their raw power for both PvE and PvP. Now, one of the examples the devs showed were some Seeker Mines that, in the current game, with no explosive damage or Seeker Mine mods, would destroy 2 bars of armor on a named NPC in normal difficulty. With these changes coming in TU5, the Seeker Mine would almost one-shot the named NPC, leaving a very tiny amount of health left. And again, that's with no talents that give it explosive damage or no mods. Another example was a 3k or 3000 skill power turret in the live game will buff damage at most by say 25 to 30%, but in TU5 the buff would be more like 150% damage. Now, this change is a huge one, going back to what we had with the Division where your skills would scale with the amount of skill power you had, and I think this is a change we all wanted. On top of this, the devs confirmed that skill haste will be replacing cooldown reduction, and this can go way above 100%. In the current game, it's very easy to get to 90% cooldown reduction, but you know, with skill haste, they're looking to get it way above 100%, and there's going to be different variables to that. Now, all current values in the live game would be buffed by 33%, so you'll see a significant change to your gear if this passes through testing. All in all, I think these changes are exactly what the game needs, and like many changes announced, it appears to be going in the right direction. The only concern I have is the raw power of these skills becoming a major issue in PvP. I hate to bring up PvP because it's kind of got this stigma attached to it that anything that affects PvP affects PvE, but we know with the Division 2 they can change them or whatever separately, so it really shouldn't make any difference. In PvE, it doesn't really matter how strong your skills are because ultimately it's PvE content. As long as they're in line with other builds within the game, it's absolutely fine. But in PvP, it could be problematic if it's not balanced properly. Now, I was there when we had the one-shot Seeker Mine meta in the Division, and I'd like very much not to go back to that if possible. Now, I guess that's what the PTS is there for though, so we'll have to wait and see how it all plans out. So with all of that in mind, my overall thoughts are they're positive. I think the devs are making some very good changes here that most people are going to be happy with. I hope the devs can reconsider the changes being made to exotics, because I do think this could undo all of the good news here. One thing I will say is, I feel like all of the new changes that came with the launch of the game appear to be getting undone, and we're kind of reverting back to how the Division was. And that's not me saying it's a bad thing, because I really think the Division got a lot right. The optimization station, the holy crap drops, skill power scaling, for example. What the Division 2 did was not build on the good things from the Division. Instead, it changed everything, and that's why I feel like it's following the same path as the Division did, at least up until the news recently. The skill overhaul appears to be going to back what we had from the Division, with the exception of the mods on the skills rather than the gear. Like I said, I'm all for it. As long as the devs build on these great systems, it's all good. Anyway, that's it for today's video. I'd appreciate your thoughts and feedback in the comments section below. It would be good to know what you guys think of these proposed changes, whether they mirror my own feelings. Again, a lot of this stuff is my opinion. It's just what I think. I don't know how to test this stuff, and I guess that's what the PTS is going to be there for. For anyone who has got access to the PTS, I highly recommend you test the skills more than anything, because that's, again, the biggest change here. Because I think all the other stuff is not so much a change that can really be tested, if that makes sense. Aside from that, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you stuck around to the end, thank you very much for all of your time. I hope you all have a fantastic weekend, and until the next one, Epic out.